Welcome back to the deep dive. I was sitting there the other day just staring at my laptop screen, doing that thing. You know the thing?
Oh, like the spinning
The
one.
spinning wheel of death, exactly.
Right.
The little progress bar that says installing update, 12 minutes remaining, and you just know
Oh,
it is lying to you.
always. It is going to be 40 minutes at least.
Right. And the fan kicks on and the thing gets super hot and you can't do anything but just sit there and wait for it to finish.
It is a pretty universal modern experience at this point. I mean, we are all held hostage by our operating systems eventually.
We really are. But it got me thinking, we accept that for our tech, right? We accept that to get the new features, the system has to go down, rewrite some code, and maybe overheat a little bit.
Hmm.
But we rarely think about that process applying to us,
Right.
to the actual biological machinery we walk around in every day.
That is actually a really apt analogy for where we are going today.
Yeah, today we're diving into a session that argues the human body is essentially the hardware and consciousness is the software. And when you get a major patch, a spiritual upgrade if you want to call it that, it is not all love and light.
No, definitely not.
It is physically exhausting. It involves literal rewiring. It involves system downtime.
And as we will see today, it also sometimes involves the police, a nude painting, and a very prickly mustache.
I love this story so much. We have got phantom tumors, we have clairvoyant tests that just completely defy the laws of physics, and a really deep look at the mechanics of how a human brain adapts to psychic data. It is a wild ride.
It certainly is.
But hey, before we get into the really weird stuff,
Yeah.
I need to set the stage properly with a bit of housekeeping. So I need to declare that this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to learn and explore the nature of reality for the sake of education.
Always good to be clear on the mission.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So let's orient ourselves here. Our map for this exploration is session 252 of the early sessions, book 6 of the Seth Material.
Such a classic era for the material.
It really is. And to give you all the exact context, the date of record is Wednesday, April 20, 1966.
Right.
The place is Elmira, New York. We are in the living room of Jane Roberts, who is the one speaking for the personality essence known as Seth, and her husband Rob. And it is about 9 p.m. And of course, we had to explicitly credit the Seth Material and the publisher New Awareness Network for all of this incredible source text.
Yes. And if you could transport yourself back to that living room in Elmira, the vibe isn't exactly a party. It is quiet. It is heavy.
It is very cautious because Jane hasn't been feeling well at all. In fact, she completely missed the previous scheduled session on Monday. The notes specifically say she is feeling, quote, not tip-top.
Yeah.
And Rob is actually really worried about her. He thinks she's genuinely sick. He thinks she has caught a bug or a flu or something.
Which, I mean, that is a perfectly reasonable assumption. If your spouse is lethargic and uncomfortable, you just assume illness.
Yep.
But when the session actually starts, Seth, speaking through Jane, of course, immediately corrects the record. He basically says, put away the thermometer, Rob. She isn't sick. She is rebooting.
Which brings us right into our first major segment,
Hmm.
the biological upgrade. Seth explains that Jane is undergoing important inner adjustments.
Yes.
Now, usually when people talk about inner adjustments, they mean they're changing their mind about something, or maybe they're having a mood swing.
Right. But Seth is very specific here. He is not speaking metaphorically at all. He is talking about literal structural changes in her biology.
He says pathways of activity are being formed. It is like her brain is physically rewiring itself to handle a higher voltage of information.
Let's actually look at the text because the phrasing Seth uses is really important. Seth states, and I will just quote a small part of the session here to illustrate the point. He says, Ruburt, which is his name for Jane, is making certain rather important inner adjustments that are resulting or will very shortly result in a definite expansion of consciousness and ability. Connections are being formed, actually, in terms of psychic structures.
Psychic structures. That is just such a heavy term.
It is, because in the context of 1966, and honestly, even today, we tend to be strict dualists. We think the mind is this sort of ghostly cloud and the body is just the machine.
Yeah.
But Seth is arguing that you cannot expand the cloud without literally upgrading the machine. He specifically mentions that new chemical balances are being achieved.
So expanding your consciousness isn't just about thinking happier thoughts or meditating. It is about your body producing different neurochemistry. It is about proteins folding differently. It is a massive internal construction project.
Exactly. And construction projects are messy. They're loud, they disrupt traffic, and they create a lot of dust. Seth is essentially telling Rob that Jane's lethargy and her physical discomfort are just the construction dust.
And speaking of those physical changes, Seth mentioned something really specific here that I found both hilarious and kind of fascinating. He brings up Jane's sinuses.
Yes. Jane evidently suffered from chronic sinus issues.
And anyone who has had sinus problems knows it is a miserable, nagging physical anchor. It just drags you down.
He does. And Seth predicts that as a side effect of this integration, this rewiring she's going through, the sinus condition itself will be very much improved.
It is so funny. Expand your consciousness, clear your sinuses. It sounds like a really bad late-night infomercial, like doctors hate this one weird trick.
It does sound funny when you put it that way, but it really aligns perfectly with the holistic model Seth presents. If the inner self gets a major upgrade, the physical glitches in the vehicle should naturally clear up.
Right.
However, the transition itself, as we are seeing with Jane, it is absolutely not seamless.
No, not at all. And this is where the kind of chilling aspect comes in for me. This is not a gentle process. Seth compares the physical discomfort Jane is feeling to a high-powered system trying to stabilize itself.
It really reminds me of the incident they referenced from the previous session, session 251.
Oh yeah, the unscheduled one.
Exactly. Jane had an unscheduled session where she just spontaneously went into a trance state, and afterwards she got physically sick. Violent nausea. Vomited 3 times.
And Rob was terrified, right? He thought she had food poisoning or a really bad stomach virus.
But Seth addresses that directly in this session. He explains it was not a virus at all. It was what he calls inner panic.
Inner panic. See, that is wild. Panic is an emotion. How does an emotion make you violently throw up?
Well, Seth is using panic here to describe almost a cellular reaction. He explains that Jane felt this massive surge of energy, a profound feeling of completeness. And her nervous system simply did not know how to direct that energy.
I really love the analogy we talked about when we were prepping for this, the voltage issue.
Right. Imagine you have a normal kitchen appliance, a toaster, let's say, and it is built for a standard 110-volt outlet. Now imagine you take that toaster and you plug it straight into a 220-volt industrial line.
Boom.
Exactly. Sparks fly, heat builds up, the wires melt. Seth says, and again quoting him here, he felt a surge of energy, however, and did not know how to control or direct it. The nausea, the malaise, it is all just the body's frantic way of dissipating that excess energy before it literally blows a fuse.
So the takeaway for the listener here is actually pretty wild. If you are working on yourself, if you are doing intense breath work, meditating, trying to expand your awareness, and you suddenly feel like garbage physically,
it might not be a failure.
Right.
It might be a massive success. It might be growing pains in the most literal biological sense. The nervous system has to adapt to process more data, and if you push too hard too fast, the hardware protests.
it is oddly a comfort in a way. Feeling bad doesn't always mean something is broken. Sometimes it means something is profoundly changing.
But that change also leaves you very vulnerable. And that brings us to the next part of the session, which is genuinely kind of scary to think about. The hazards of empathy.
Oh man, the Marion incident. This is where the upgrade goes totally wrong.
But it is where the mental firewall drops completely.
So here's the story for our listeners. Out of nowhere, Jane starts feeling all the symptoms of an ovarian tumor. Real severe pain, the discomfort, the extreme anxiety, the whole terrifying package. And obviously, she is terrified.
She is completely convinced she has a very serious medical condition.
But here is the crazy twist. Jane did not have a tumor at all. Her good friend Marion Spaziani did.
Just imagine that. Jane had visited Marion recently, and because of this biological upgrade we just discussed, Jane's psychic channels were blown wide open. She wasn't just empathizing in the casual way we usually mean it, like, oh, I feel so bad for you.
No, she literally downloaded the physical symptoms. She picked up the actual physical signal of Marion's illness, and her body played it back on her own hardware.
Seth calls it sympathetic pickup. He explicitly warns her, saying he picked up her physical symptoms you see sympathetically, and he must learn to guard himself now against such occurrences.
This is the empath problem with a capital E. You walk into a room, your friend has a bad headache, and suddenly you need an aspirin. It is a superpower, but it desperately needs a filter.
It really highlights a critical part of psychic development that almost always gets overlooked in New Age circles. We always want to open up, open our minds, open our hearts to the universe.
Yeah.
But Seth is saying here very firmly that you need boundaries. As your sensitivity increases, it becomes absolutely necessary to distinguish between your own sensations and what he calls alien impulses.
Alien impulses. I just love that terminology. It makes it sound like some kind of sci-fi invasion.
In a very real way, it is an invasion. It is an invasion of data that simply does not belong to you. It is signal interference.
So what is the fix then? Does she need to isolate herself or wear a tinfoil hat?
Not quite. Seth's advice is a specific mental action. He tells Jane she needs to clear her mind and actively suggest to herself that these alien conditions be immediately removed.
So it is quite literally like installing a spam filter for your brain. You have to train the software to recognize what is your mail and what is just random noise coming in from the neighbors.
And this entirely validates the earlier point about the biological upgrade. If the radio receiver of your mind is being physically tuned to pick up more stations, more frequencies, you are inevitably going to pick up a lot of static at first. You have to learn how to tune the dial with real precision.
So Jane is dealing with these intense physical upgrades, blowing internal fuses and accidentally downloading her friend's tumor symptoms. Honestly, it sounds exhausting. Why would anyone actually want to go through this?
Well, the payoff is what we get to see in the second half of this exact session. It is the proof that this upgrade is actually doing something incredible, the new capabilities.
Yes, the experiments. This is where we move from the internal subjective feelings to hard external verification. Seth isn't just talking about abstract philosophy anymore. He is actively trying to see inside sealed envelopes.
This was a very regular practice for Jane and Rob. Rob would take an object or a document, seal it in an envelope, often double seal it so it was completely light-proof, and Seth would have to describe the contents. It is a rigorous controlled test of clairvoyance.
And in this session, we actually have two separate experiments. The first one is for a Dr. InStream.
Right.
And let's just do a quick flyover of this one because the second experiment is the real showstopper.
Agreed. For Dr. InStream, the target object hidden away was simply a small white scribbled pad.
And Seth just starts rattling off these incredibly specific impressions. He sees an encounter that had a disturbing aspect, and then he describes a man involved in this encounter. And I have to quote this because the phrasing just cracks me up every time. He says, "The man has a mustache of the prickly variety, or unusually bushy."
It is such a wonderfully weird detail, a prickly mustache.
I just keep imagining this mustache being the actual source of the disturbance. Like he was so aggressively prickly it caused an argument in the street. "Sir, your mustache is prickling me. I must ask you to leave."
Humor aside, though, the sheer specificity is the key here. He mentions the initials AG and a misunderstanding about a letter that was written back in January or February.
It really shows that Seth isn't just seeing the physical object, the paper pad itself. He's seeing the entire history associated with the object. He is reading the emotional residue left on it.
Which is a very common theme in psychometry, reading the history of an object just by touching or focusing on it. But let's move to the main event. Experiment number 2. The sealed envelope Rob prepared himself.
Okay, this one is literally a movie script waiting to happen. So Rob has torn a clipping out of a local newspaper. He put it in the envelope and sealed it. And the clipping is about their friend, Bill McDonald.
And the cultural context is everything here. We need to know who Bill is and what he did. Bill McDonald owns a local art gallery in Elmira. And Bill, being a bit of a provocateur, decided to put a completely nude painting right in his front display window.
In 1966 in Elmira, New York. I bet that went over really well with the locals.
About exactly as well as you would expect. The police actually visited his gallery 3 separate times.
3 times. Did they really have nothing better to do in Elmira?
Apparently not. It was a highly organized endeavor by the local authorities to force him to take the painting down. But Bill completely refused. He made a public announcement of intention to keep the art exactly where it was.
So you have fine art, nudity, police pressure, and local defiance. It is a full-on drama. Now remember, Seth does not know any of this is in the envelope. Rob just hands Jane the sealed opaque packet while she's in a deep trance.
And Jane, speaking as Seth, simply presses the envelope to her forehead.
Let's look at the actual hits because they are staggering. First, Seth says there is a connection with something ripped or torn out.
Which is perfectly literal. Rob literally tore the article out of the newspaper by hand. He didn't use scissors, so the edge of the paper was visibly rough and ripped.
Then Seth says something not kept and mentions a connection to a schedule.
This one is fascinating. Bill's gallery had posted public hours, a schedule, but because Bill had recently been ill, he hadn't been keeping those hours, so the schedule was literally not kept.
Then Seth clearly states there is an organized endeavor involved.
That is the police pressure. It wasn't just one random angry guy complaining. It was the police department. An organized, institutional effort to sanitize the gallery window.
And then the color detail. Seth says he sees blue-green written with a pen.
Rob had taken a pen and written the date on the clipping in blue ink before sealing it.
It is just boom, boom, boom. Highly accurate, completely hidden details. But then we get to the part that really made my jaw drop when I first read it. The visual puzzle.
This is where it gets incredibly profound regarding how Seth actually perceives reality. Seth describes seeing a mishmash as of tiny crisscrossing wires.
At first, Rob is a bit confused by that. He thinks, okay, maybe Seth is seeing through the folded layers of the newspaper clipping, and the printed text overlapping itself looks like tiny crisscrossing wires.
Which is a very plausible theory, but there's a second layer to it. In the gallery window, right alongside the controversial Nude painting, Bill also had a physical wire sculpture on display.
Oh, right. So Seth might actually be seeing the scene described in the article, or the physical location the article is talking about.
But then Seth adds another crucial detail that throws everything off. He says he sees a connection with a building that seems to be behind the wires.
A building behind the wires. Now, Rob is really scratching his head. There was absolutely no building mentioned anywhere in the text of the article.
This is where the physical object, the clipping itself, becomes the key to the whole mystery. Rob eventually opens the envelope and turns the clipping over.
The back of the clipping.
Exactly. On the reverse side of the newspaper clipping, printed on the back of the article, there was an advertisement, a large photo.
And what was the photo of?
It was a photo of a nursery sign, and right there in the background of the photo was a building. And because the paper is thin, cheap newsprint, if you were somehow looking through the envelope and through the paper itself, you would see the black text from the front crisscrossing perfectly with the image of the building printed on the back.
That is the ultimate aha moment. Seth wasn't reading the paper like we do, left to right, front side only. He was perceiving the entire object as a single three-dimensional block of data. He literally saw the back of the page through the front of the page.
It heavily suggests that for Seth, our physical rules of spatial orientation, front, back, up, down, simply do not apply. He perceives the whole object simultaneously. The mishmash of wires was undoubtedly the text and the background image bleeding through each other in his perception.
It is like having Superman X-ray vision, but applied to folded newspaper clippings. It perfectly validates the earlier point about Jane's biological upgrade. If her consciousness is expanding, she is not just seeing more things, she is seeing things in a completely different way. She is bypassing the biological limitations of physical eyes entirely.
And notice the extreme precision of it. He didn't just casually say, oh, I see a building. He specifically described the visual confusion, the mishmash, that would naturally occur if you superimposed the front and back of a piece of newsprint. It is a highly specific visual detail you just wouldn't invent if you were just randomly guessing.
It is chillingly specific, and it ties the whole session together beautifully. The reason Jane feels sick, the reason she is having panic attacks, the reason she is accidentally feeling her friend's tumor, it is all because her nervous system is actively building the capacity to do this, to see a building on the back of a clipping hidden inside a sealed envelope.
It is the heavy price of admission for higher perception. The biological organism simply has to bear the physical load of the increased signal.
Which brings us right back to the question we started the show with, the upgrade. If consciousness is a literal physical structure, as Seth claims, if it involves chemical balances and forming new neural pathways, then what are we currently doing to our own hardware every single day?
We live in a world of constant, absolute information overload. We are voluntarily and constantly plugging our 110-volt brains into the 220-volt outlet of the internet, of global stress, of endless rolling data feeds.
Maybe that is exactly why we are all so exhausted all the time. We are in a constant state of inner panic, and we are constantly rebooting without even realizing it.
And perhaps just like Jane, we desperately need to learn how to distinguish between our own genuine internal signals and the alien impulses we pick up from the chaotic world around us.
That is definitely the biggest takeaway for me. You need a filter. You need to know what is yours and what is just the noise coming from the gallery window down the street.
And you also need to be patient with your own biology. Real structural growth takes a heavy toll.
Absolutely. This session really is a masterclass in the actual mechanics of the mysterious. It takes the woo-woo out of psychic phenomena and makes it incredibly tangible. It is biology. It is physics. It is just a type of physics we don't quite understand yet.
If this discussion has sparked your curiosity, and I certainly hope it has, you really owe it to yourself to go directly to the source. We are just barely skimming the surface of what the Seth Material has to offer.
You definitely need to study the Seth Material books yourself. Seriously, go get them. You can find all of them at the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. That is sethcenter.com. The early sessions.
Reading the raw, unedited transcripts like Session 252 gives you a texture and a profound nuance that no summary or podcast discussion can ever fully match.
Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Seth mentioned earlier that Jane's channels were wide open. We almost always think of being open as a purely good, enlightened thing. But today we learned that being wide open can mean getting sick, panicking, or feeling a phantom tumor.
So the real question is, if you could instantly upgrade your own consciousness right now, if you could suddenly see inside the sealed envelope, would you actually take the deal, even fully knowing the physical price your body might have to pay?
Would you plug yourself into the 220-volt outlet? Something to really mull over while you wait for your next phone update to finish installing.
Indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We will see you in the next deep dive.